Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, let's talk about this upcoming fight at light heavyweight between champion Dmitry Bivol and former super middleweight champion Gilberto Ramirez. So, it took me a while to get round to doing a video about this fight, and the reason why is because from the moment that this fight was announced, I was really conflicted on it. I didn't really have a strong idea of who was going to win or how the fight was going to go, and I wanted to really take the time to think about it and ponder my thoughts back and forth before I made a prediction video, because in my personal opinion, this is a very interesting fight, a very intriguing fight. It's a great fight, to be honest. And yeah, it's a fight that's very difficult to predict as far as I'm concerned. So let's talk about it. So both these guys are undefeated. They're both very athletic fighters. They're both the same age, I believe. I think both of these guys are 31, so they're pretty much at their physical prime, both of them. And both guys, of course, have, they have a lot of the same attributes. Like I said, they're both good athletes, good on the outside, good stamina. And yeah, both guys are obviously coming off some momentum. Now, Dmitry Bivol in particular, his stock is at an all-time high right now, at least in terms of the outside appearance, because of course he's coming off one of the best wins of his career, the biggest win of his career by far, against Canelo Alvarez. Canelo, of course, being the popular figure that he is right now, getting a victory over him with the run that he'd been on. It looks great on paper, at least. So a lot of people are really high on Bivol right now. They're seeing him as a significant favourite going into this fight, mostly based on the performance against Canelo. Now, me personally, and again, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to really take the time before making this video. Those of you who have been following my channel will know I wasn't too impressed with his performance against Canelo. Look, call it what it is. I know it was a big win. I know it was a really impressive accomplishment, at least on paper. But just ignoring the record, ignoring the hype, and just looking at that fight for what it was, I've never rated Canelo Alvarez. To me, Canelo Alvarez is a very basic, very limited, very beatable fighter. And when you take into consideration the advantages, natural advantages that Bivol had going into that fight, Bivol was the bigger man, Bivol was the stronger man, Bivol was the bigger puncher, Bivol was significantly more skilled, he was faster, he was the better athlete. He just had every single advantage going into that fight against Canelo, who's relatively crude, relatively limited, and relatively basic. So I would have expected better from Bivol in that fight. I wasn't overly impressed by the performance. So yeah, a lot of people, like I said, they're high on Bivol right now, and a lot of it has to do with that Canelo performance. But me personally, I wasn't overly impressed with it. I was expecting more. If it was a real fight, that is, I was expecting a lot more from Bivol. I mean, when you're the significantly bigger man, when you're the athlete, when you're the bigger puncher, when you're the champion defending the title, and when you're the guy who has spent your entire career in that division fighting a guy who's moving up, you really should be stopping him. I would have expected a stoppage victory from Bivol, but we never saw that. We just saw a comfortable points win using long-range boxing. So, yeah, it was a good win on paper, but it doesn't impress me. I'm not overly impressed with it. So, putting the Canelo fight aside and just looking at the rest of Dmitry Bivol's career, he's obviously a world champion. He's had a very good run as champion. He's had, 10, 11 title defenses, and he's fought decent competition. I mean, he's fought the likes of, former champions such as Jean Pascal. He's fought a future champion in Joe Smith Jr. He, of course, had that good win against Sullivan Barrera. And, yeah, he's done well. He defeated Craig Richards, who's a solid European-level fighter, I'd say. So Dmitry Bivol's had a good run as champion, and he's definitely one of the top two guys in the division. It's either him or the lineal champion, Beterbiev. But going into this fight, I'm actually quite concerned for Bivol, because as you guys that have been following me for quite a while will know, I really rate Gilberto Ramirez. In my opinion, Gilberto Ramirez, and I've said this for a while, he's one of the most underrated fighters in the sport. I remember back in the day when he won his title against Arthur Abraham. And I remember that Arthur Abraham fight very clearly because even though Abraham was definitely past his prime, he was definitely faded, and he definitely wasn't the Abraham from his glory days. I still thought, based on just the eye test, based on what I saw from Ramirez, I saw a guy who had great lateral movement, really, really good work rate, really good stamina. He's a southpaw. He's a guy who's very good at taking away the jab. And his long-range boxing, in my personal opinion, was better than any of those super middleweights from that era. Like, I saw enough in that fight, just ignoring who Arthur Abraham is, and ignoring the stage of his career he was at. I saw enough from Gilberto Ramirez in that fight to let me know that he would probably beat Andre Ward. He would probably beat Carl Froch. He would probably beat Mikkel Kessler. Like, I would probably favour him over all those guys. I think he's a very, very good long-range boxer. Like I said, he's a southpaw. And he kind of reminds me of Joe Calzaghe in the sense that he has such great work rate in the ring, despite being such a big guy. And he only got better after that Abraham fight. The fights against Jesse Hart, which I thought he clearly won both. And he had a little run as WBO super middleweight champion, and I felt that he just looked really good to me. And I think he's one of these guys, Ramirez, who's going to be really tough to beat just based on his size, his work rate, his lateral movement, his southpaw style. And he's also a guy who really mixes it up well. He can fight inside, he can work the body, he can throw hooks and uppercuts, he can fight on a swivel, he's got a very good punch variety, he's got a very good jab. And I just think that Gilberto Ramirez, to me, is a fighter who just oozes talent. I've always rated him. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't have problems, right? He certainly does. One of the biggest problems with Ramirez, in my opinion, is the fact that he seems to lack ambition. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but you guys might recall that when he became champion, he started to gain a bit of hype, but during his run at super middleweight, he basically seemed unwilling to challenge himself. He didn't show any ambition whatsoever. He didn't show any drive to try and get some big fights and to really promote himself and, to take on the best guys in the division. He seemed to know where his bread was buttered. He seemed to be content with just fighting a couple of times a year against, C-class fighters and whatnot, and really not putting himself out there. And I think as a result of that, you started to see him get a bit lazy with his performances. Like, he struggled against the likes of Yuneski Gonzalez, for example, who he really should have beaten. And if truth be told, when he first moved up to light heavyweight, he really didn't announce himself. He kind of rose through the ranks slowly and quietly, and wasn't really... How do I describe it? He wasn't really putting himself out there like that, taking on the best contenders in the division. It seemed as if he was just sort of lingering around and waiting for a title shot. So taking that into consideration, he might not have as much momentum as you would like going into the biggest fight of his career, because this definitely is the biggest fight of his career. But assuming this is the old Ramirez, assuming this is Ramirez perfectly motivated, perfectly fit, in shape, and ready to go, I give him a very, very good chance of beating Dmitry Bivol, because I think he has the talent to do it. Despite the fact he moved up from super middleweight, he's actually the naturally bigger guy. I think he's about 6'3", something like that, so he's a couple of inches taller than Bivol. I think he has a longer reach than Bivol. And from what I've seen, he might actually have the faster hands than Bivol. He might actually have the faster hands, but it's hard to say who's the better athlete of the two, because Bivol, to me, has also shown fantastic work rate. When he fought Joe Smith Jr., for example, he was throwing power shots all night, and he never got tired at any point during the fight. And he's a guy who throws very hard, very straight, very, very short, straight punches and hooks. He's a guy who's just so consistent with his power shots on the outside. One of the best long-range boxers in the light heavyweight division. Great jab, great snappy right hand that's like a shotgun. I remember when he took out Trent Broadhurst in the first round, and that was one of them knockouts that was so quick. It was like blink and you miss it. He's got that real cat-quick straight right hand. And he's just a very, very fundamentally sound, athletic boxer puncher. And he's got very good boxing skills, Bivol. Now, that's not to say that he isn't beatable. I mean, what I have seen from Bivol is that he is somewhat vulnerable when he fights somebody who's got a longer reach, who can kind of beat him at his own game. Like if you saw his fight against Craig Richards, for example. Now, Craig Richards is a similar sort of size and dimensions to Ramirez. You know, he's a long-range boxer, guy with a great jab, a really solid right hand from distance. And he was able to give Dmitry Bivol a lot of trouble on the outside. Even though I thought Bivol won most of the rounds clearly, I felt at the same time that Richards had a lot of opportunities in that fight that he didn't really take, if you know what I mean. Like, he was able to bust Bivol up a bit, mark up his face, and he was doing it with just basic long-range boxing. And I think that Bivol is a guy who, he's not really that comfortable facing a guy who's taller and longer than him. And that's one of the reasons that I give Ramirez such a good chance of winning this fight. I really think this is a great fight, man. I really do. And one of the things that makes the fight so hard to call, as far as I'm concerned, is that Gilberto Ramirez, as good as I think he is, as talented as I think he is, we haven't really seen him at his best in his recent fights. I don't think he's looked as good in his run at light heavyweight as he did in his run at super middleweight. I just think, again, a lot of that to me is down to the fact that he might have been fighting to the level of his competition. You know, for example, the likes of Yuneski Gonzalez. I mean, he really should have been beating a guy like that more convincingly than he did. He's still getting the wins, but his performances leave a lot to be desired. And I'm kind of, let's say I was rooting for Ramirez, I'm concerned that he might not be at the top of his game going into fight Bivol. That's the only thing from his perspective that kind of concerns me. And from Bivol's perspective, if I was rooting for him, I'm kind of concerned that the victory over Canelo may have flattered him a bit, if you know what I mean. Because, like I said, I don't really rate Canelo. And I think if Bivol thinks of that performance, that he's going to be able to do the same thing against a guy like Gilberto Ramirez, who's significantly bigger and significantly better than Canelo, I think he's mistaken. I think he's in for a real shock. So, yeah, I'm struggling with this fight, man. I'm struggling for who to pick. It's just such a good fight. I mean, you've got both guys who have, like I said, a lot of the same attributes. Both guys have got great stamina. Both guys are good long-range boxers. Both guys have got good balance, good movement. You know, they've both shown a good chin in their career. You know, both of them have fought some pretty big punches and haven't really been in any serious trouble. I suppose Dmitry Bivol is a little bit more proven at the weight, at light heavyweight, even though I think Ramirez is the bigger man. You know, he hasn't fought the kind of consistent punchers that Bivol has. You know, been in the ring with the likes of Jean Pascal and guys like that who we know have power. Joe Smith Jr., another big guy with power. But I think that Ramirez, if he's on the absolute top of his game, if this is the best we ever see from Ramirez, then I think he wins this fight. I do. Like, I'm tempted to pick him by a incredibly close decision. I can see this fight being very close. I can see it being very cagey. I can see both guys having success. But I honestly think that Gilberto Ramirez, with his longer reach and his better lateral movement, I think he might actually win this one on points. So yeah, I'm going to put my neck out here, as it's a difficult one, you know, and I'm not at all confident in my pick. But that's what I like about it. So I'm going to take a bit of a gamble here. I'm going to go with Gilberto Ramirez to win this fight by an incredibly razor-close decision. I don't think the fight will be a stoppage. I'd be very surprised if Ramirez was able to stop Bivol. I think Bivol has shown a very good chin, very good durability. You know, he's shown enough stamina, good enough legs and balance to where I think his boxing fundamentals will get him out of trouble. You know, I think he'll be able to tuck up nicely behind a guard, and if Ramirez is teeing off on him, I don't think he'll be able to get the stoppage. I don't think that's very likely. But I do think he can outbox Bivol. So, yeah, I'm going to go with the upset in this one. I know most people are picking Bivol. Most people think that he's just going to go in there and completely school Ramirez. I've noticed a lot of people don't really rate Ramirez that highly, but Ramirez, like I said, he has advantages in this fight. He's the taller guy, the longer guy. He's also the significantly more experienced fighter of the two. In addition to his amateur background, he also has... I know Bivol had a much better amateur background than he did, but Gilberto Ramirez was a decent amateur himself, and he has 40 professional fights, or something like that, at least 40. So he's had a long pro career, and he's fought decent competition himself. I mean, beating Arthur Abraham for the title, defending against the likes of Jesse Hart. So he's not a bad fighter, and he's gotten some good impressive wins against some fringe contenders at both divisions. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the upset on this one. I'm gonna go with Gilberto Ramirez by a razor close decision. I think it could be potentially controversial. Now the fight is taking place in, I believe it's taking place in the Middle East. Where's it taking place? I can't remember. Is it Dubai or somewhere like that? I don't know. It's in the Middle East somewhere, so it's probably going to be a relatively neutral affair. I don't think there's going to be much politics, much favoritism here and there. I think we're going to get a fair fight here, and that's one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to it, man. I think this is a great fight. I'm really looking forward to it, as you can tell. So yeah, this is my completely unfiltered, random thoughts on this fight. This is what I've been going back and forth on it all this time and trying to prepare a video, and this is the best I can come up with. So yeah, I think this is a great fight. Thoroughly looking forward to it, and I'm going with the upset. I'm going with Gilberto Ramirez by a very, very close unanimous decision. So yeah, let me know what you guys think anyway. Thanks for watching, and God bless.